1936 to 1941, Lucky Luciano, the most powerful mob boss in America, tried to kill Bumpy Johnson 47 times. He failed every single time. By the fifth year, Bumpy decided to kill him back. This is the story of the most impossible survival streak in criminal history. 5 years of shadow warfare between two legends. 47 assassination attempts that should have ended with a funeral. Instead, they ended with the most unexpected alliance in organized crime. When the smoke cleared, both men were alive, and the rules of the American underworld had changed forever. To understand why Lucky Luciano wanted Bumpy Johnson dead, you need to understand what was happening in New York in 1936. This was the height of organized crime's golden age. Prohibition had made millionaires out of gangsters, and now those millionaires were fighting over what came next. Lucky Luciano had spent the early 1930s systematizing organized crime. He'd eliminated the old-style gang bosses, created the commission to mediate disputes between families, and established territories that each crime family would control without interference. It was a brilliant system with one problem. Nobody had told Bumpy Johnson. While Luciano was organizing crime families downtown, Bumpy was building his own independent empire in Harlem. By 1936, he controlled the numbers racket, loan sharking and protection services throughout uptown Manhattan. More importantly, he refused to pay tribute to any of the Italian families. This wasn't just about money. This was about the fundamental structure of organized crime in America. If Bumpy could operate independently in Harlem, what stopped other criminals from rejecting the commission's authority? What stopped every neighborhood in New York from declaring independence? Luciano saw Bumpy Johnson as an existential threat to everything he'd built. Either the commission controlled all organized crime in New York, or it controlled nothing. That's why Luciano made a decision that would define the next 5 years of both men's lives. Bumpy Johnson had to die. The war began on March 15, 1936, with what should have been a simple hit. Luciano sent 3 of his best assassins to eliminate Bumpy during his weekly meeting at the Red Rooster Saloon. The plan was textbook. Wait for Bumpy to arrive, corner him in the back booth, 3 shots to the head. The assassins had killed dozens of men using the same method. It had never failed, but Bumpy Johnson wasn't like other targets. 20 minutes before the hit was scheduled, Bumpy walked out of the restaurant through the kitchen, leaving his hat and coat on the table to make it look like he was still there. When the assassins moved in, they found an empty booth and a bartender who swore Bumpy had been there 30 seconds earlier. It was the first hint that killing Bumpy Johnson wasn't going to be as easy as Luciano expected. Attempt number 2 came 3 weeks later. Luciano's men planted a bomb in Bumpy's car, timed to explode when he started the engine. It was a foolproof method until Bumpy noticed the fresh scratches around the ignition and had one of his associates start the car from 30 feet away using a rope tied to the key. The explosion destroyed half the block. Bumpy wasn't even scratched. By the 6th attempt, Luciano was getting frustrated. By the 15th attempt, he was getting desperate. By the 25th attempt, he was getting paranoid. How was Bumpy Johnson surviving assassination attempts that should have killed him easily? Was he getting inside information about the hits? Did he have spies in Luciano's organization? Or was he just lucky beyond belief? The answer was simpler and more terrifying than Luciano realized. Bumpy Johnson wasn't just avoiding the assassination attempts. He was predicting them. After 20 years of surviving on the streets, Bumpy had developed an almost supernatural ability to read people, situations, and environments. He could tell when he was being followed. He could sense when something was wrong with a familiar location. He could identify potential assassins by the way they positioned themselves in a room. But more than that, Bumpy understood something about Lucky Luciano that Luciano didn't understand about himself. He was predictable. Luciano used the same assassination methods over and over. Restaurant hits, car bombs, sniper attacks, poisoning. He had a playbook that had worked for years, and he couldn't conceive that someone might have figured it out. Bumpy had figured it out. By attempt number 10, he could predict where and when Luciano would strike next. By attempt number 20, he was setting traps for the assassins. By attempt number 30, he was using Luciano's own murder attempts as opportunities to eliminate his enemies. This was psychological warfare at its finest. Every failed assassination attempt made Bumpy look invincible and made Luciano look incompetent. Word spread throughout the underworld. Bumpy Johnson was unkillable, but Luciano couldn't stop. To abandon the assassination attempts would be to admit defeat. To admit defeat would be to lose face with the other crime families. To lose face would be to lose power. So Luciano kept sending assassins, and Bumpy kept surviving. Attempt number 31 was a poisoning at Small's Paradise. Bumpy took one sip of his cognac, tasted something wrong, and immediately induced vomiting in the restaurant's bathroom. The poison was enough to kill 10 men. Bumpy was back at his table within 20 minutes, finishing his dinner. Attempt number 37 was a sniper attack from the roof of the Teresa Hotel. Bumpy spotted the glint of the rifle scope and dove behind a car just as the bullet shattered the window of the store behind him. The sniper was found 3 days later, having apparently fallen off the roof while trying to escape. Attempt number 43 was an elaborate setup involving a fake police raid. Assassins dressed as NYPD officers surrounded Bumpy's apartment building and waited for him to come home. Bumpy recognized them as imposters because real NYPD officers wouldn't have bothered with a warrant. By 1940, 4 years into the war, Luciano had spent over $500,000 on assassination attempts. He'd lost dozens of his best men. Other crime families were starting to question his judgment and his competence. That's when Bumpy Johnson decided to end the war on his terms. On January 15, 1941, Bumpy walked into Rao's restaurant in East Harlem, where Lucky Luciano was having dinner with his underboss, Frank Costello. No weapons, no backup, no protection, just a 36-year-old man walking into a room where the most powerful mob boss in America was eating pasta. The restaurant went silent. Luciano's bodyguards reached for their guns. Costello's hand moved toward his waistband, but Bumpy held up both hands, showing he was unarmed. "Mr. Luciano," Bumpy said, stopping 10 feet from the table. "We need to talk." Luciano studied the man he'd been trying to kill for 5 years. Up close, Bumpy didn't look like the invincible ghost that had haunted his nightmares. He looked like a businessman in an expensive suit, calm and confident, but obviously human. "You got balls walking in here, Johnson," Luciano said, "but you're going to die walking out." "Maybe," Bumpy replied, "but before that happens, let me ask you something. How much money have you spent trying to kill me?" "What's your point?" "My point is that you're spending more money trying to kill one man than most people make in a lifetime. And for what? Because I won't pay tribute to families that don't operate in my neighborhood." Bumpy took a step closer. "I got a better idea. Instead of spending money trying to kill me, why don't you make money working with me?" It was the last thing Luciano expected to hear. For 5 years, this had been about domination, control, and respect. Bumpy was talking about it like a business proposition. "What are you offering?" Luciano asked, curious despite himself. "I'm offering you 10% of everything I make in Harlem. In exchange, you stop sending assassins, and I stop killing them." The room was dead silent. Frank Costello's eyes went wide. The bodyguards looked confused. This wasn't how mob wars were supposed to end. 10%, Luciano repeated. "Of everything?" "Everything. Numbers, loans, protection, real estate. 10% of gross revenue, paid quarterly, no questions asked." Luciano did the math in his head. 10% of Bumpy's operation would be worth more than most crime families made in a year, and it would cost him nothing except the recognition that Harlem was different from other territories. "And what do I give you in return?" "Recognition," Bumpy said. "You tell the other families that Harlem is under the Commission's protection. Anyone who wants to do business uptown has to go through me, with your blessing." It was brilliant. Luciano would get money and face. Bumpy would get legitimacy and protection. Both men would benefit from ending a war that was costing more than it was worth. "Why now?" Luciano asked. "You've been surviving my people for 5 years. Why offer to pay now?" Bumpy smiled for the first time since entering the restaurant. Because killing 47 of your best men was getting expensive for me too, and because I'd rather make money than make enemies. It wasn't entirely true. The real reason was that Bumpy had realized something during 5 years of survival. Killing Lucky Luciano wouldn't end his problems. It would create bigger ones. Other crime families would see Luciano's death as an opportunity to move into Harlem. The commission might declare war on Bumpy's entire organization. But making peace with Luciano, that would give Bumpy something he'd never had before: legitimacy within the larger structure of organized crime. Luciano extended his hand across the table. 10%, paid quarterly. And if you're ever late with a payment, our deal is off, and the war starts again. Bumpy shook the hand of the man who'd tried to kill him 47 times. The handshake that ended the Luciano-Johnson War became legendary in organized crime history. Two of the most powerful criminals in America had fought for 5 years, and both had survived. More than that, they'd found a way to profit from their conflict. The peace lasted until Luciano's deportation to Italy in 1946. Even after that, the arrangement continued with Frank Costello, who honored the deal his boss had made. Bumpy Johnson paid his quarterly tribute for 15 years, and no Italian family ever seriously challenged his control of Harlem again. But the real significance of the war wasn't the peace that ended it. It was what it proved about power, survival, and intelligence in the criminal world. Lucky Luciano was the greatest organizer of crime in American history. He had more money, more soldiers, and more influence than any criminal before or since. But he couldn't kill one man who was smart enough to adapt, patient enough to endure, and strategic enough to turn defense into victory. Bumpy Johnson survived 47 assassination attempts, not because he was lucky, but because he was learning. Every attack taught him something new about his enemy. Every survival made him stronger and more confident. Every failed hit made Luciano more predictable and more desperate. The war between Lucky Luciano and Bumpy Johnson became a master class in psychological warfare. It proved that in the criminal world, as in any other, intelligence was more valuable than violence, strategy was more effective than strength, and sometimes the best way to win a war was to convince your enemy that peace was more profitable than victory. When FBI agents later studied the war, they called it the most sophisticated criminal conflict in American history. Both men had fought with their minds instead of just their guns. Both had survived by adapting their tactics, and both had won by finding a way to profit from their conflict.
This is the story of 47 assassination attempts that should have ended with a funeral, but ended with a handshake. It's the story of how two legends decided that making money together was better than killing each other separately.
If this story of survival, strategy, and the most impossible peace treaty in crime history captivated you, hit that subscribe button. Share this with someone who understands that the smartest battles are the ones you find a way not to fight. And in the comments, let me know, would you have made peace with someone who tried to kill you 47 times? Next week, we're revealing the classified FBI files on this 5-year war that federal agents tried to keep secret for decades. You won't want to miss that.